Our topic for today is about form in music. Let's take a look on the screen. When we talk about music, the form is labeling with letters. Now for the letters, how they usually do, they use alphabet. So they will be divided into different sections. You will see the song, it says A sections, B sections, and C section, etc. And let's say if one section to the next section is almost similar, they will use apostrophe sign. You may be seeing the section is A sections, and then after that they're going to repeat again one more time. However, it's slightly different, but most of the section is the same. Then they will put an apostrophe, and then if let's say it's another section but still similar, they will put double apostrophe. Now in music we call it as a prime, so you may see A prime or A double prime. Now moving from A sections to B sections, it's gonna be the same thing. If let's say the B section has to be repeat again, but it's almost similar but slightly different, then you will see the prime sign, it's written as B prime. Or if let's say it has to repeat one more time, but it's still almost more or less similar, you will see another sign called B double prime. Now the common form names, there are a few. For example, true compose. True compose means an entire piece of composition that does not contain any large repetitions. If a short piece includes repeated phrases, it may be classified by the structure of its phrases. Another form called strophic. Strophic means one main section repeated multiple times. Binary means two different main sections. That means it's just like A or B. Now this is usually used in the Western classical music. The A section is moved away from the tonic and end in another key, and the B section move back and end in the tonic. Another form is ternary. Ternary means you have three main sections. Variations, you have one section repeated many times. Canon, you have contrapuntal compositions that employs a melody with one or more imitation of the melody played by different voices after a certain duration. All these song forms just need to remember. Another one is pop song. Pop song, we already listened last time. For us, we are going to focus on pop song form. You will see the form is intro, first, chorus, bridge, and chorus. However, this is not really an exact that have to be like this all the time. But this is just to give you a big picture how usually the pop song forms looks like. Is there a possibility that maybe after intro, the first be repeated twice? Yes. Is there a possibility that maybe the chorus repeated twice? Yes. However, in pop song, you must have intro, you must have first, chorus. Bridge is an optional. Sometimes in some songs there's bridge, sometimes in some songs they don't have bridge. What you need to do for this song form is you just need to remember. We are not going to play a song for you to identify whether it is true composed or not. When we play the songs during the critical listening, we are going to focus on the pop songs only. For the written test, you will see the question asking you, for example, if the sections is repeated multiple times, what is the type of song form? Then the answer is strophic. If the song have two different main sections, what is the song form? The answer is binary. For song forms, what you need to do is you just need to remember all the definitions. This is what you are going to have for the written test. There's no listening for you to identify. Just have to remember the definitions. This is example of rounded binary. This is the sample of ternary. This is the sample of canon and variations. Let's talk about musical expression marking. When we talk about musical expression marking, that means we are talking about the dynamic. Now in music itself, there are a few types of dynamics. It's represented by alphabet. For example, P. P means piano. Piano means soft. Double P means pianissimo, means very soft. Triple P means pianissimo, means extremely soft. You see here, they have all the asterisks. What you need to do is, you need to remember all these asterisks because it's gonna be on your written test. For example, MP stands for mezzo piano, means moderately soft. MF stands for mezzo forte, means moderately loud. There's a possibility. The question is asking you, you have MF, MP, and FP. Please put in order from the softest to the loudest. Or maybe the other way around. Please put in order from the loudest to the softest. So if let's say you have MF, MP, and FP, if you need to put from the softest to the loudest, that means the first is MP, followed by MF, and then finally followed by FP. If let's say the question is asking you to put in order from the loudest to the softest, then you have to put it as FP followed by MF and finally is MP. Let's talk about MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It is introduced in 1982 and appears as an instrument in 1983. It is developed to allow musicians to connect synthesizers together, and this is a simple way for musicians to control multiple electronic instruments at the same time, such as synthesizer, drum machine, or samples. In the past, when MIDI has not been invented, how usually the musicians record their performance? They need to practice. They practice somewhere in the studio or maybe at their home or at the garage to ensure that the performance is tight. Once the performance is already tight, they are going to go to the studio. They will record. Before 1982, there is no digital recording. The recording was actually conducted in analog, which is they will record in the tape. The musicians have to ensure when they perform correctly, there is no mistake. What happens if they make a mistake? They have to redo again from the top. But sometimes some engineers, maybe they decided to just do a punch. So when we talk about the punch, basically they just repeat from the specific sections and start from there until to the section they think is already enough. However, this technique sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't work, because the engineer, they have to move the tape and find the correct point. Once they found the correct point, then they will record from there. If let's say the point was incorrect, what happened is they have to redo everything from beginning. How long is usually a tape can record continuously is usually not more than 30 minutes. That's the reason why the musicians have to work very hard to ensure that they can play correctly without any mistake. Then they go for the recording studio and do the recording. Today, recording has changed to digital. In digital, there are so many possibilities you can do because you can do editing. For example, you play from one section to another section. You make a mistake. You just want to redo the chorus section. You can just record the chorus sections again, and after that, they will copy paste. They cut the section that they don't want, and then they will place with a new section which is they think it sounds better. Which one is better, analog recording or digital recording? I will say either has its plus and minus. People say the analog recording sounds good because it's very warm. Digital sound recording, it sounds a little bit too cold and empty, and maybe it's a little bit like plastic. Analog itself is a continuously signal. So when you see a continuous signal, that means it's a perfect wave. Digital recording is not a continuous signal, it's a discrete signal. That means every single signal that is presented by analog will be converted to digital as a step. If you zoom in into the audio file, you will see there are a lot of steps to create a sine wave. The good things about the digital, you can do a lot of punching, you can do a lot of comping. But again, of course, it has the advantage and disadvantage. Today, actually, it's more and more musicians, they start to go back again to the analog recording because they think analog is better compared to the digital. But can we skip this digital era? I think it's difficult because we are already in the digital, and then digital is a technology. However, analog is a pioneer of the digital recording. Let's go back again to MIDI. Can use MIDI to combine the computer to compose, recording, and edit the MIDI data called as sequencing. You have been doing your Logic Pro X Lab. Logic Pro X Lab basically is based on MIDI. So every time when you press a key on the keyboard, it's gonna send a signal to Logic Pro, and then Logic Pro will identify, and then it will record the signal and send back again to the keyboard. That's why you can hear the sounds again. One thing about MIDI, this is just an information, it's not music. When you have a MIDI file, the file is very small. Compared to the MP3 or WAV. When you record a WAV file for 1 minute, it can cost you around 10 megabytes. For MP3, usually it's just like compressed up to 10%. So an audio file that is 10 megabytes, after you convert to MP3 with 128 kbps, the result is just 1 megabyte. What happens when we press a key on keyboard? There are a few things. First of all, which note that is pressed? Is it C1, C2, C3, C4, or maybe like D1, D2, D3, D4? And then how hard does it press? It means the velocity. The velocity is represented with the number. When you press very loud, it will show in 127. When you press very soft, it will show in the smaller number. How long does it hold? If you still remember when you do your Logic Pro, when you use the mouse, you click, you can adjust the length of the note. When you want to hold the note longer, you just stretch it. But if let's say you want to hold the note shorter, you make it even shorter. Then sometimes some instruments just contain note with zero velocity instead of note off. How many channels does the MIDI contain? In the past, when MIDI just introduced in the industry, it only has 16 channels. And then the channel number 10 is always a MIDI drum track. Because it has only 15 channels excluded with the MIDI drum track, the musician need to think what are the instruments they need to use in order to compose a song. But today, technology has advances. In one song, they don't really need to have 16 channels. They can have as many as they want as long as the computer can process. For example, if you want to use your Logic Pro X, you want to compose a song up to 100 channels, it's fine as long as your computer is powerful enough to run 100 tracks. Which form does the MIDI channel voices presented? There are two. This is based on binary form. So a MIDI channel, we have status byte followed by 1 or 2 data bytes. If you see over here, this is the sample of MIDI status and data byte. So this is the status byte, this is the data byte 1, data byte 2, and then this is the meaning of the message, and this is how it looks like. What is the content of the status byte work on MIDI? The first 4 bits of the status byte tell MIDI that the following message is a note on or note off command. Then the last 4 bits tell MIDI what MIDI channel the message is. For example, 0000 equal to channel 1, 1111 equal to MIDI channel 16. You can see over here, every time you have the number is only 0 or 1. 0 means no, 1 means yes. The channel number are offset by 1 value since channel 1 is set by binary 0 and channel 16 is set by binary 15. So this is example status byte 10010100. The first data byte is 00111100 and the second data byte is 01111111. What is the content of the data byte work on MIDI? So the first data byte tells MIDI what note to play. For example, decimal 60 is equal to middle C, and the second data byte tells MIDI how loud to play the note. In this case, the maximum velocity of 127 is set. If you see your MIDI file, it shows velocity at 127, that means this is already the loudest level. Can you reduce the velocity? Yes, you can reduce the velocity just by bringing the mouse and drag the velocity down, or you can double click and then you type the numbers that you want the velocity to be. What is the standard velocity when you use mouse to click? The velocity stays at 80. So 80 is not too loud, it's not too soft. If you need to have a louder sound, you need to increase the number. If you want to have a softer sound, then you decrease the number. What is the sample of MIDI messages? Note on is equal to which key or note has been pressed or played. This includes the velocity, how hard the note was played. Note off means which key or note has been played or released. Control change means indicates that a controller, a foot pedal, or a fader knob has been pressed or tuned. The control change message includes the number assigned to the controller and the value of the change is from 0 to 127. And finally, pitch wheel change. The pitch of the note has been set with the keyboard's pitch wheel. For the pitch wheel, if you take a look on the keyboard, you will see there's a button, something like this, right? It says pitch bend. So when you press the pitch bend, the pitch will increase. By default is half tone, which is semitone. However, can you adjust this level from semitone become a tone? Yes, you can just do the edit. So every time you press the pitch bend, you push all the way up. It will follow whatever the setting you do. So if let's say the setting is semitone, then all the way up is semitone. If the setting is tone, all the way up is tone. What is the playback device for MIDI? It can be anything. The file can be played in software or maybe synthesizer or electronic devices that support MIDI files by using the MIDI instruments. Now in the past, MIDI is most of the time is on the keyboard. However, not all keyboard as well have MIDI. But since the technology advances, today when you buy any keyboard, it already comes with the MIDI facility because MIDI is something that we already cannot avoid. And also, it's not only about MIDI. When you are going for your year 3, you learn about stage lighting. You see all the lighting controller. All these lighting controller, actually, they based on the MIDI messages. So every time when you press the button, it will send a signal with the MIDI. When you press the knob, it's gonna send the signal as well, but in MIDI. Why they use MIDI? Because MIDI messages is very small. So it doesn't really contain too many spaces. It's just a small little data. What are the types of MIDI devices that generate MIDI data? For example, MIDI controller, MIDI sequencer, MIDI sound module. Now this is example of MIDI controller. MIDI controller basically is a hardware which generates and transmits MIDI data to MIDI devices. Some of the MIDI controller contain no sound. Now if you see over here, MIDI controller is just a hardware with nothing inside. So when you press all the keys, there's no sounds coming out. how can you get the sound when you want to use MIDI controller? You must have a sound module, or you must have a software that generate the sound. Now in the past, software is not very famous. So what the industry usually they use a hardware. So they set the sound module. This is example of sound module. Why people prefer to buy a MIDI controller with the sound module? A full keyboard, or maybe like just 61 keys. Now one keyboard can cost you around $3,000. If let's say you buy the keyboard with the longer keys, for example, maybe you want to get like 76 keys, it can easily up to $5,000. Or maybe you want to buy a full keys, 88 keys, it can easily cost you $7,000. So the musician thinks it's a little bit not cost friendly because of the pricing. So what the company do is they start to think what they can do to produce the sound, but they don't need to have the keyboard. That's the reason why they have the sound module. Now sound module itself, the sound is exactly the same. The difference is it is just a small little device which is you can move portable. So you don't really have to buy a big keyboard which is very heavy. Now with this one, sound module, you can just connect any kind of keyboard, and then you can use your keyboard which is maybe very light, and then you can get the sound from the sound module. You can see so many different kind of sound module. This sound module is more affordable because one sound module usually costs just around $1,000 to $2,000. Then if let's say you buy your MIDI controller, it just costs around maybe $100 to $200. You can save a lot of money. This is MIDI sequencer. A MIDI sequencer basically is a device or application software that can record, edit, or playback music by using MIDI. When music sequencer just came out in the industry, it was a big hit. Why? Because people doesn't really need to bring an instrument. They just sequence everything inside this box, and then they just press the play button, then the music will play. For the singers, this is a heaven. Why? Because singers always have difficulties to find musicians. Every time want to find musicians, they have to pay. And then musician is not cheap. Another thing is every time when they have the musicians, they have to practice. So they have to find the time when the singers can do, musicians can do. Unfortunately, it's a little bit ineffective. So when this MIDI sequencer come out in the industry, the singers was happy. They don't need to find musicians anymore. They just have to buy this MIDI sequencer. They bring this MIDI sequencer to the gig. They hit play, they sing, and everything goes well. Of course, for the musician, it's not good because they are losing gig, but for the singers, this is cost effective. Now, another way people use MIDI sequencer, sometimes they use MIDI sequencer to double the real performance. So, for example, maybe the drummer is playing the real drum, but they want to make the sound thicker. So, they will record again using the MIDI, play for the MIDI sequencer. So, at the same time, when the drummer is playing, the MIDI sequencer is also playing, which is the MIDI sequencer is the one who keeping the tempo. And also another thing, what usually people do is they sequence the orchestra here, they press the hit button, then we play exactly as usual, then they have more musical background. What is the sample brand of MIDI musical instruments and controller? There are a few brands that are quite well known, for example like Moog, Yamaha, Chord. Sample brand of MIDI controller only is like M Audio, Alesis. How does MIDI musical instrument or controller looks like? They have a few different looks, like a keyboard, drum, or maybe clarinet or sustain pedal. This is MIDI saxophone. Now, by right, saxophone, when you blow, you hear only like the saxophone sounds. However, because this is a controller, then the guy can change the sound. He can use piano sound, he can use guitar sound, he can use trumpet sound, he can use synthesizer sound. What are the tools you need for doing a simple MIDI recording? There are three things. First of all, you need the sequencer software. Second of all, you need the MIDI musical instruments or controller. And then finally, you need a MIDI cable or MIDI USB interface. How does MIDI connection look like? This is the old MIDI cable. All MIDI cable, it has 5 pins. It's gonna be connected to MIDI in, MIDI out, and MIDI through. But along the way, technology advances. So after the industry invented the MIDI cable, they also invented the USB MIDI cable. So USB MIDI cable is basically, it looks like two MIDI connections, however at the other end is a USB cable. Technology advances, they think this is not very effective. Today all the MIDI instruments, basically they just use a USB cable, which is a lot. Our topic for today is about form in music. Let's take a look on the screen. When we talk about music, the form is labeling with letters. Now for the letters, how they usually do, they use alphabet. So they will be divided into different sections. You will see the song, it says A sections, B sections, and C section, etc. And let's say if one section to the next section is almost similar, they will use apostrophe sign. You may be seeing the section is A sections, and then after that they're going to repeat again one more time. However, it's slightly different, but most of the section is the same. Then they will put an apostrophe, and then if let's say it's another section but still similar, they will put double apostrophe. Now in music we call it as a prime, so you may see A prime or A double prime. Now moving from A sections to B sections, it's gonna be the same thing. If let's say the B section has to be repeat again, but it's almost similar but slightly different, then you will see the prime sign, it's written as B prime. Or if let's say it has to repeat one more time, but it's still almost more or less similar, you will see another sign called B double prime. Now the common form names, there are a few. For example, true compose. True compose means an entire piece of composition that does not contain any large repetitions. If a short piece includes repeated phrases, it may be classified by the structure of its phrases. Another form called strophic. Strophic means one main section repeated multiple times. Binary means two different main sections. That means it's just like A or B. Now this is usually used in the Western classical music. The A section is moved away from the tonic and end in another key, and the B section move back and end in the tonic. Another form is ternary. Ternary means you have three main sections. Variations, you have one section repeated many times. Canon, you have contrapuntal compositions that employs a melody with one or more. Our topic for today is about form in music. Let's take a look on the screen. When we talk about music, the form is labeling with letters. Now for the letters, how they usually do, they use alphabet. So they will be divided into different sections. You will see the song, it says A sections, B sections, and C section, etc. And let's say if one section to the next section is almost similar, they will use apostrophe sign. You may be seeing the section is A sections, and then after that they're going to repeat again one more time. However, it's slightly different, but most of the section is the same. Then they will put an apostrophe, and then if let's say it's another section but still similar, they will put double apostrophe. Now in music we call it as a prime, so you may see A prime or A double prime. Now moving from A sections to B sections, it's gonna be the same thing. If let's say the B section has to be repeat again, but it's almost similar but slightly different, then you will see the prime sign, it's written as B prime. Or if our topic for today is about form in music, let's take a look on the screen. When we talk about music, the form is labeling with letters. Now for the letters, how they usually do, they use alphabet. So they will be divided into different sections. You will see the song, it says A sections, B sections, and C section, etc. And let's say if one section to the next section is almost similar, they will use apostrophe sign. You may be seeing the section is A sections, and then after that they're going to repeat again one more time. However, it's slightly different, but most of the section is the same. Then they will put an apostrophe, and then if let's say it's another section but still similar, they will put double apostrophe. Now in music we call it as a prime, so you may see A prime or A double prime. Now moving from A sections to B sections, it's gonna be the same thing. If let's say the B section has to be repeat again, but it's almost similar but slightly different, then you will see the prime sign, it's written as B prime. Or if let's say it has to repeat one more time, but it's still